going to start with the next roundtable. Here is with us Professor Carlos Viesca, who is going to be the moderator of this roundtable. And I think you are here, the three people who are going to talk now. Ricardo Losardo, Ekaterina Lomperis, and Ramaz Shengelia. Professor Carlos Viesca.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have the pleasure to be here and to present my three colleagues. And we'll start this roundtable about religion and medicine with the presentation of Professor Ramaz Shengelia. He is a very old friend of mine from the last century. And he works at the University of Georgia in Tbilisi and have developed a very beautiful museum there and have a lot of publications. If I say about it, we take all the time. Then Professor Shengelia, he will be his presentation on San Hilarion the Iberian, Epoch-Making church figure, and Silverless hair.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, dear colleagues.
The images came from Tbilisi, very far.
No. So, Hilarion the Iberian, Georgian is the same because this Iberia existed in the 3rd century before Christ. It was Eastern Georgian state. We rarely have as much data about Georgian saints and clerics as we do about Hilarion the Iberian, his origins, peregrine family, years of wars, places where he served, public perceptions, etc. Peters offers substantial, mathematically precise conclusions regarding Hilarion's biography. According to his framework, Hilarion was born into a wealthy, noble family in 822 in Kakheti, Eastern Georgia. Sabine associated him with the Donauri branch of the Vachnadze family. When discussing the Christian merits of Hilarion the Iberian, which were a global significance, we must first consider the sharp conceptual confrontation that occurred within the Patriarchate of Constantinople regarding relations between Western and Eastern Christians. Like the Emperor and Patriarch Ignatius of the Constantinople, Hilarion the Iberian believed that schism was inadmissible. Substantial body of hagiography material about the Saint Hilarion has been preserved. It comprises 4 editions of 20 items, 1 detailed atonic edition, 2 short atonic editions, 9 metaphrastic editions, and 8 synaxaria. One of the 3 hymns was written by Ioannis Zosim, a member of the Atonic Literary Circle. So, Marie Felicite Brosse was the first to raise the issue of the life of Hilarion the Iberian. He was followed by Dimitri Bakradze, Alexander Sagarelli, and Mose Janashvili. In 1860, Muravio translated the life of the Hilarion the Iberian into Russian. Sabinin, on the other hand, translated or rather created his own version. We take into account the data and supplement they are appended to the earlier detailed editions. Nicomar naturally also addressed this topic. On his monograph on Basili I of Macedonia, Albert Vogt provides the comprehensive account of the Saint Hilarion's biography. At various times, both Georgian and foreign scholars have written about Hilarion the Iberian. It is traditionally believed that the life of Hilarion, foreign scholar, the Iberian, was written to one of the saint contemporaries, Basil the Proto-Asyncrites, by the order of the Basil I of Macedonia. According to one view, an encomium was initially composed, and later, based on it, the principal versions were created by different scholars or various countries. Atonit, one of the Georgian colonies in Greece, Jerusalem, or any of the Georgian monasteries, etc. Since the earliest age, Hilarion showed a strong inclination towards worship. His father even built a small church for him at the court, but the young Hilarion envisioned the mission on a much broader scale. Initially, he spent 10 years in Georgia and in Goreja desert, where he expanded furnished the Transfiguration Church, established so-called branch at the same Laura together with 11 brothers. Then one night, yes, church in the Kalauri. Is the Goreja desert monasteries, and then he established this Kalauri 9th century church. He did not remain there long. However, he turned this attention westward. He journeyed to Constantinople and stayed into the capital of Byzantine Empire until 1859. Therefore, they traveled extensively, performing numerous acts of kindness. Hilarion's healing ministry is believed to have begun upon his return from Jerusalem. The knowledge he had acquired in Kakheti further deepened during the time in the Holy Land, enabled to become a miraculous physician. Hilarion gained popularity among the local population while still very young. The clergy recognized him as a man and declared of great promise. To ordinary people, they appeared as a savior, a bearer of hope. He was the eyes of the blind, the legs of the lame, the home of the homeless, the healer of souls and mentor, the servant and the comforter, for treated everyone with utmost humanity. After his pilgrimage to Constantinople, Hilarion traveled to Mount Olympus, the sacred mountain that served as the most prominent Christian center at the time. He was received with honor and soon demonstrated the healing abilities. On Sundays, the nephew of the local headman would serve Eucharistic wine at the table. This young man had been disabled since birth. His limbs were paralyzed, and both his eyes and ear were impaired. One day, he stumbled over the stone, fell, and went crying to Saint Hilarion. By the grace of the God, the Holy Father healed him, and Hilarion's reputation once again spread widely. Crowds began to gather. Many brought him gifts, but he took nothing. Hilarion was a silverless healer. Hilarion departed from Mount Olympus, Bithynian Olympus, once again fled into solitude. His journey through the cultivated Christian world of the time was marked by acts of devotion to God and service to humanity. This is why his name shines so brightly. His reputation preceded him wherever he went. People were familiar with his needs, and the doors of the powerful and influential were always open to him. After his pilgrimage to Constantinople, Hilarion continued to Thessaloniki. Along the way, he encountered the lame vineyard keeper sitting at the edge of the vineyard. The monk asked the man for a bunch of grapes. The keeper replied that the monk was welcome to taste any of the bunches, but apologized for being unable to serve him personally. He could not stand. So, though the will of the God and the power of a saint, Hilarion enabled the man to rise and bring him a bunch of grapes. The man was overcome with joy. He was searching for this healer, hoping to reply him in some way, but he had gathered people from all centers of Thessaloniki to share the story of the miracle, but he could not locate the solemn monk, who never smiled. He was this nickname. This episode, I believe, is a masterful blend of the myth and reality, in which the vineyard carries a deeper theological significance. Saint Hilarion spent 2 or 3 years in Rome, undertaking significant religious and diplomatic missions. It appears that they traveled there on behalf of Basil I of Macedonia and Ignatius of Constantinople. Amid the looming threat of schism, his revered Holy Father, whose integrity placed him above any suspicion of political involvement, was entrusted with the delicate task of easing tensions. His sole message was the unity of the church, and they succeeded. The schism was postponed for 2 centuries. The Georgian saint played a vital role in this outcome. Otherwise, it is difficult to account for the extraordinary honor he received after death, when he was venerated and ranked among the apostles. By emperor's order, the holy relics of 2 apostles and Saint Hilarion were interred side by side in an Arcosolium at the Romana Georgian monastery, and the lighting of 3 lamps for each became a sacred tradition. After leaving Rome near Thessaloniki, Hilarion witnessed the heartbreaking scene: a dying boy and being carried out of his home and led living in service until the end of his days, surrounded the honor and love. In this moment, Hilarion's spiritual grace as a cleric is clearly distinguished from his medical abilities. He prayed to God for the everlasting healing in their illness and their bodies. Hilarion's death in 875 and then the tomb that followed once again became closely linked with the healing and medicine. The tomb, masterfully constructed, was believed to possess the power to cure all of the who suffered, whether in body or mind. The sick, the crippled, the mentally ill, and poor from across the country flocked to it, as the site came to be known for its wonder-working and healing grace. So, servants Vasily II seized the sacred reliquity and brought it to the imperial capital. A proposal was then extended to the monks, disciples, and compatriots of Saint Hilarion to build the grand assury in this honor. Yet they refused, choosing instead a place of profound sanctity and tranquility along the coast of the Bosphorus Strait. Romano-Georgian monastery was established, marking the with Basil the blessing and the active participation. The Romano-Georgian monastery was established, marking the birth of the first Georgian religious center in Europe. Researchers they long searched for the tomb of Saint Hilarion among the Pargor, Peters, Takhnishvili, and D'Alessio D'Alessio. We were fortunate to discover the site where the Romana monastery, the first Georgian monastic center in Europe, once stood. And we, with the high probability, the resting place of Hilarion the Iberian. This location lies near Istanbul on the European shore of the Bosporus Strait in the modern-day town of Istiniye. In Georgian hagiographic sources, this toponym appears as Sostenion and linguistically plausible identification. The accompanying slides show the town and the surviving fragments of the Romano-Georgian monastery. We hope the future archaeological investigations will provide definitive answers. Is Arcosole where it was? Yeah. In Georgia, specifically in Ubis, stands 9th century monument built by Gregory of Hansta, a contemporary and presumably the follower of Saint Hilarion the Iberian. Though the nature of their relationship remains in mystery, on the semicircular fresco above the monastery, circular monastery portal, 3 figures are depicted, flanking in composer the images of Saints Cosmas and Damian, echo the arcs of Car. At the center stands a saintly figure accompanied by Assumptauruli inscription on either side the reed, Hilarion the Georgian. So it not works well. Yes, this is the arc. Cosman Damian and the 3 figures. Moreover, the territory of present-day Armenia at the Ahtala Georgian monastery, there is a fresco depicting 3 figures, 3 of the greatest saints, Efthymius the Athonite, George the Athonite, and between them the honorable figure is the Saint Hilarion the Iberian. This fact once again highlights the special place of Saint Hilarion the Iberian holds among Georgian saints. Thus, Hilarion the Iberian stands out of the remarkable and to some extent the greater cleric of the crisis period of the Christian world. The essence of this spiritual and missionary work lay in serving God and humanity, primarily expressed through his care for people held by means of miraculous abilities. Commissioned by the Patriarchate of Constantinople, Hilarion played a crucial role in preventing the schism between Western and Eastern Christians during the 2 years visit to Rome. Today, relevant documents are being sought in archives of the Vatican. We are working on this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Shengelia. Now, we have Ekaterina Lomperis. She is researcher in Baylor University and is one of our younger researchers at the Society. We are very happy to have you. She will present us early modern reformations of medicine and religion.
Thank you very much. Perfect. Can you hear? Yeah, works. All right, well, thank you very much for being here. My presentation will discuss how Christian approaches to medicine changed in the early modern era, more specifically in the 16th century, under the influence of the Protestant Reformation. So while the history of religion and medicine has traditionally been done primarily through the lenses of cultural histories or social histories, I suggest bringing the history of theology, which is intellectual history of Christianity or the history of Christian thought, in conversation with the history of medicine. So in this presentation, I will argue that major changes, specifically in Christian theology, that occurred during the Protestant Reformation are responsible for major changes in traditional Christian approaches to medicine. And the main theological change of the Protestant Reformation was the transformation of religious teachings on salvation, also known as justification. Namely, answer to the question, what does one have to do to be saved? So first, in what follows, I will discuss how the questions of salvation and medicine were first approached in medieval Catholic tradition, and then how these were reformed in the early modern Protestant Reformation. And my paper is based on my book, The Reformations of Medicine, Early Modern Beginnings and Contemporary Possibilities. So first, medicine and salvation in late medieval Catholic Christianity. So although medieval Catholic Christianity did not have a sort of formalized or official teachings on salvation, there was a set of beliefs which medieval Catholic Christians followed. And these beliefs were kind of at the center of these beliefs was this idea that Christian faith was essential, but not sufficient for salvation. In addition to having Christian faith, sacramental participations in the work of virtue ultimately impacted if one is going to be saved or dead. In other words, human action, human virtuous action or human sinful action ultimately impacted the fate of one's soul. So this approach to salvation influences themes in Catholic medieval religious teachings of medicine, which could be roughly grouped around three main themes. Medieval religious Catholic teachings of medicine stressed the necessity to avoid sin in medical advice, avoiding sin in medical practice, and practicing medicine in virtuous or spiritually meritorious ways. Couple examples here, avoiding sin in medical advice. Physicians were strongly discouraged from advising to patients, let's say, over-consuming intoxicating beverages or engaging in sexual behaviors which were viewed as illicit, or following dietary or breaking the church's fast to, eat certain food during fast. It's a very famous quote from Canon 22nd of Lateran 4, since the soul is much more precious than the body, you forbid any physician under pain of anathema to prescribe anything for the bodily health of a sick person that may endanger his soul. That became very important for medieval understanding of the practice of medicine. Going back here, avoiding sin in medical practice, similarly professional integrity was emphasized. Physicians were prohibited from abusing patients or experimenting on patients, or just not treating the patients for the sake of financial gain, or not consulting other physicians if they did not know what the solution was. And then finally, the emphasis was on practicing medicine in virtuous ways. Spiritually meritorious ways would be theological terms, such as, for example, treating poor people gratuitously, free of charge. So I really like this quote. This is from a 13th century sermon of Humbert de Romans, which kind of summarizes this concern relating religious teachings on the practice of medicine to religious understanding of salvation. Here's the quote. Above all, let them, physicians, beware of doing aught in their art against God in themselves or in others, lest while they heal bodies, they kill souls, others or their own. So the medieval understanding of salvation was challenged in the 16th century Protestant Reformation, and as I will demonstrate, this influenced how Christian teachings on medicine changed as well. So this is the picture of Martin Luther, who was the primary founder of the Protestant Reformation, and the issue of salvation was a central issue for the Protestant Reformation. Luther, who was an Augustinian monk, came to believe that the medieval teachings of salvation, which required both faith and human works or virtuous human actions to eventually merit salvations, were erroneous. They did not align with what Luther saw in the Bible. Instead, Luther came to believe that the Bible taught salvation through faith alone, which came to known as salvation or justification by faith. I'm going to skip over why Luther came to this conclusion. He thought that the teaching of salvation by faith was found throughout the Bible. Here is some kind of famous verses Protestant reformers used to support their cause. Ephesians 2:8-9 is probably one of the most famous ones. By grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing. It's the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. That being said, I'm going to skip over that. With the Protestant reformers insisting on salvation being available through faith alone, we got to understand what they meant by faith. What is this faith which saves? And it's very important here that for Luther and his followers, faith, saving faith, was not simply like a cognitive affirmation of Christianity. It was not simply that, yes, mentally one affirms that Christianity is true. And faith for them was not kind of like a spiritual experience that did not last. But Luther and his followers conceptualized Christian faith as trust or reliance on God above all else. This is kind of sort of like an emotional disposition of living life in perpetual reliance on God, in perpetual trust in God and God's promises. So that new idea about salvation and this new conception of faith, I argue, influenced early modern change in early modern understanding of medicine. This is a famous quote from Luther, and I'm going to unpack it a little more. Use medicine, but do not rely on it, rely on God. So what was the new Protestant approach to medicine? First of all, we see that early modern Protestant writing, specifically Luther's writing, kind of shifted away from that emphasis on sin and virtue, which characterized medieval Catholic approaches to medicine. We see sin and virtue, they're kind of consequence, for Luther, they're consequence of Christian faith, but they're not central anymore to the extent to which they're previously central. But instead, Luther stresses emotional disposition of trusting or relying on God, not on medicine, for healing. That's a very interesting moment, what Luther meant by it. For early Protestant reformers, as traditionally, in previous tradition, God was the creator of medicine. So Luther consistently stresses that God is the one who ultimately heals through medicine. But ultimately, without God's will, without God's action, medicine does not heal. Therefore, while using medicine, one should sort of maintain a kind of emotional detachment from medicine. You do not place your hope for healing in medicine. You place your hope for healing in God while using medicine. So that's one important emphasis of early modern kind of change in spiritual approach to medicine. But another emphasis, which I think is really important, including for some of our current questions, is that Luther and his followers stress that while God can, and on occasion does, heal miraculously, medicine, natural healing, and not miracles, were God's preferred way of healing. Why did Luther come to believe that? Well, because he thought that the Bible and the history of Christian tradition kind of testify to that. God seems to work in the world, Luther would say, through material means. For example, the incarnation. God becoming a human being in Jesus Christ, of the Bible. God tells God's will in a book, called the sacraments. God becomes present in the material element of bread and wine. Even in biblical narratives, Luther constantly reminds us, in the book of Genesis, God creates first people, Adam and Eve, and puts them to work in the garden. Again, God wants to bring God's purposes through material world. So therefore, for Luther, God, for some reason, prefers to work in the world through material, natural means. Therefore, a proper expression of Christian trust, remember the centrality of trust in that, is not neglecting medicine, is not seeking supernatural miracles of healing, but specifically in using medicine. And this is very important because here early modern Protestant reformers disrupted the traditional hierarchy which have existed for centuries before, that there is miraculous healing and there is natural healing through medicine, miraculous healing, miracles of faith, as we heard in previous presentation, and supernatural miraculous healing is a higher form of healing. So for early modern Protestant reformers, medical healing, in fact, becomes just as important, theologically important, religiously important, as miraculous healing. So that's a very important turning point of the early modern Protestant Reformation. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina. Now we have the presentation of Professor Ricardo Losardo from Buenos Aires. He is actually our vice president, one of our vice presidents, and also president of the Latin American Academy of History of Medicine. His theme is Jesuit Medicine in the Rio de la Plata.
Well, it's a good pleasure to be here in this University of Nebrija, in this 12th meeting, but 10 minutes is a very short time, and then I will speak in Spanish so you can have the translation on the screen. Entonces, a ver, la idea de hacer este pequeño repaso de la trayectoria de los misioneros y los sacerdotes jesuitas en el Río de la Plata es mostrar su... a ver, ¿cómo se pasa desde aquí? A ver. Ahí está. Es mostrar su aporte, el aporte que hicieron en esta parte sur de América del Sur. Ellos fundamentalmente fueron educadores y estaban liderados por Ignacio de Loyola, que creó la Orden de los Jesuitas en 1540. Y los primeros jesuitas vinieron de Perú y de Brasil y se instalaron en Argentina, Paraguay y Bolivia. La labor que llevaron ellos fue fundamentalmente científica, pero no solo se... Apretando ¿no es cierto? No. Mejor así. Mejor así. La labor que llevaron ellos fue eminentemente científica, pero también llevaron una labor educativa y también en la parte médica. Aquí en este mapa estamos viendo las sendas que ellos ampliaron en esta zona del sur de Sudamérica. Y vemos cómo desde Brasil y desde Perú fueron aumentando las carreteras, por llamarlo de alguna manera, y de esta manera ofrecían mayor comunicación entre los pueblos. Hay una figura muy destacada que es el padre Pedro Lozano, Pedro Lozano tiene la característica que es un madrileño y es el primer historiador que viene a estas tierras del sur de América. Pedro Lozano empieza a describir todos los fenómenos naturales, toda la parte histórica de esta zona y su relación con los indios que vivían, o aborígenes que vivían aquí. Otro padre también que vemos aquí eran franceses, Charlevoix y el padre Nicolás del Techo, que es una versión castellanizada de su nombre francés. Y los jesuitas venían de distintas regiones de Europa. Acá vemos cada una de las banderas y los países de España, de Italia, de Alemania, de Francia, de Inglaterra, de Grecia y de otros países. De tal manera que hacían una contribución cultural, multicultural, muy polifacética. Y eso le permitía abordar a la cultura indígena de una manera distinta. Los indígenas, de esta forma, se sentían atraídos y realizaban de alguna manera una conquista de tipo espiritual y mezclaban la idiosincrasia europea que tenían los jesuitas con la idiosincrasia americana nativa de aquí. Este es un mapa donde mostramos los principales pueblos que crearon los jesuitas. Y en cada pueblo que creaban también cierta educación, es decir, hacían pequeñas escuelas y hay algunos historiadores que hablaban justamente sobre la enorme importancia educadora que habían tenido los jesuitas en esta parte. Estamos hablando de 1602 a 1767, que es la fecha en que los jesuitas son expulsados de esta región. Marcelino Menéndez y Pelayo, un conocido historiador español, miembro de las 4 academias reales españolas, director de la Biblioteca Nacional, decía que no hubo mejor educadores que los jesuitas en ese periodo de tiempo en estas tierras. Ellos crearon, como les decíamos, colegios primarios, secundarios, universidades. Es decir, fueron las primeras universidades las que hicieron los jesuitas y las hicieron en Córdoba y en Chuquisaca. Chuquisaca actualmente pertenece a Bolivia. De esta manera ellos se compenetraban en el lenguaje de los aborígenes y a su vez los aborígenes tenían varias lenguas y los jesuitas de alguna manera conocían esas lenguas, trataban de aprender esas lenguas y entonces de esa manera tenían una formación muy especial y tenían un trato muy personal con cada uno de los pueblos indígenas. De esta manera, como decíamos recién, introducían la cultura cristiana en estos territorios. Pero no solo eso, sino que también ellos, los jesuitas, escribían libros de cómo veían esta historia en esta tierra. Y de esa manera la cultura indígena pudo ser conservada a través de los textos de los jesuitas que la pusieron de manera textual. O sea que lo que escribieron los jesuitas sirvió también para preservar los conocimientos indígenas de aquella época. Por supuesto que fueron los que hicieron las primeras imprentas en esta región. La primera imprenta fue en Lima, no en esta zona sur, pero después sí hicieron una imprenta en las misiones jesuíticas de Paraguay, luego en Córdoba y más tarde en Buenos Aires, en el Río de la Plata. Con la imprenta divulgaron todas las obras y de esa manera se aceleró la educación en esta región. Lamentablemente en 1767 fueron expulsados los jesuitas por un problema político y fueron disueltos en 1773. Sin embargo, en 1814 fueron perdonados y de esa manera vueltos nuevamente a existir como orden jesuita. Y volvieron luego al Río de la Plata. ¿Qué relación tuvieron los jesuitas con la medicina? Bueno, los jesuitas que arribaron aquí no eran todos médicos, eran entendidos en medicina. Había algunos que eran médicos, que los vamos a ver, que son casos muy puntuales, y la mayoría de ellos, que pertenecían a distintos orígenes de Europa, a distintos países de Europa, eran entendidos en medicina y en boticarios también, en farmacia. Por supuesto que esto le daba limitaciones, pero por supuesto que también mezclaban la medicina que tenían los nativos de América Latina a través de la herbolaria y de esa manera se enriquecían los conocimientos que traían los jesuitas de Europa más los conocimientos médicos de herbolaria que tenían los nativos de América. Hay que destacar en esta primera parte a Blas Gutiérrez. Acá hay varios jesuitas, pero al primero que esto lo vamos a pasar, son varios los jesuitas que estuvieron aquí. Blas Gutiérrez era médico, era un jesuita médico. Blas Gutiérrez había nacido en Castilla la Vieja, médico, y había estado luego en Lima y luego vino a las regiones estas del sur de Sudamérica. Después, en otros periodos, por supuesto que había algunos que no eran cirujanos, pero hacían flebotomías, ¿no es cierto?, que eran, digamos, practicantes o expertos en esas tareas, pero sin ser médicos ni cirujanos, porque no tenían esa formación. Luego, en esta segunda parte, tenemos que destacar a Pedro de Montenegro, que también es médico y se había formado en Galicia. Es decir, que hay una gran preponderancia de médicos españoles que se hicieron jesuitas y fueron a hacer la medicina a estos lugares, cuando todavía en el sur de Sudamérica no estaba instalado el Virreinato del Río de la Plata. O sea, el Virreinato del Río de la Plata se hace unos años después, como 7 años después, que echan a los jesuitas. O sea que esta es la primera historia de todas. Este hombre, como dice en la pantalla, trabajó en el Hospital General de Madrid y luego fue para estas tierras. Hay otros jesuitas, acá está la lista, que ustedes la pueden ver, en 1689, Enrique Adami, José Brasalelli, 1689, y así hay varios, Tarragona, y en esta tercera parte, tenemos que destacar a Thomas Falkner y a Segismundo Aperger. Estos son una cantidad de nombres jesuitas que ustedes ven, muchos de ellos nombres alemanes, porque vino un grupo alemán muy importante, alemanes, franceses, españoles, ingleses. Y acá vemos a Thomas Falkner, también médico. Thomas Falkner venía de Inglaterra y era también el Segismundo Asperger, que era tirolés y le decían el alemán, aunque no se sabe ciertamente si era médico. Y, por supuesto, todos los jesuitas y todos los que practicaban medicina estaban muy ligados a la botánica, por la herbolaria, ¿no es cierto? Acá vemos a Thomas Falkner, que era un doctor de profesión, que llegó a Buenos Aires cuando tenía la edad de 28 años y que había estudiado nada menos con Richard Met en la Real Sociedad de Londres y que luego vino al Río de la Plata y aquí se unió a la Compañía de los Jesuitas. Por supuesto, es muy conocido el libro Anatomy de Falkner y American Disease Cure with American Medicines. Y se lo conocía como el jesuita inglés. Toda esta gente que estamos diciendo fue anterior a los
médicos que nosotros empezamos a estudiar en nuestras tierras, que se llama Agustín Eusebio Fabre, Cosme Argerich y Miguel O'Gorman, que son los primeros médicos del virreinato del Río de la Plata. O sea que esta presentación que nosotros estamos trayendo aquí es para que ustedes vean que antes de estos tres médicos y antes de la instalación del virreinato del Río de la Plata hubo un grupo importante de médicos, por supuesto de Europa, que vinieron a estas tierras a través de los jesuitas, y que ellos se adhirieron a esas misiones jesuíticas, se hicieron jesuitas, y de esa manera fomentaron la cultura a través de la imprenta y, por supuesto, mejoraron la medicina y atendieron los pacientes en esa época. También trajeron instrumentos para hacer operaciones, flebotomías y demás, hasta que fueron expulsados. Entonces, esta charla, de alguna manera, sirve para el padre, el último papa que tuvimos, el Papa Francisco, fallecido, argentino, era también jesuita, entonces es un homenaje en realidad que uno hace. Y bueno, es para recordar que la medicina en el Río de la Plata no solo empezó con el virreinato del Río de la Plata, sino que hubo antes de todo eso, y hubo un importante aporte de médicos misioneros y curas, sacerdotes, que estaban en la orden de los jesuitas, que se instalaron en estas zonas y mejoraron la salud de su población nativa. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctor Losardo. Tenemos 2 minutos para una o dos preguntas. Una, nos dicen. Bueno, creo que nos deben la pregunta. Pues muchas gracias a nuestros 3 ponentes. De esto hay mucho para seguir platicando, por supuesto.